Let's talk about the visual elements of art for a moment now. The visual elements of art are also known as the formal elements of art, and they are line, form, color, value, texture, light, composition, and space. The first of these formal elements of art that we'll see even in the earliest cave paintings is line. And line has many dynamic qualities. This painting that we're looking at here by Jackson Pollock is all about line, and look at how the line moves. It has a lot of energy. And so line can have meaning, and this comes out of the Russian artist from the early 20th century, Kandinsky, in that a jagged line might make you feel nervous, and a flowing line might make you feel relaxed. Line can communicate a lot. Now, form is an important thing. You know, everything that you put down has to have a shape of some kind. And we're familiar with the idea of primary colors. I would like to posit that there are primary forms. The triangle, an aggressive shape. The square, a stable shape. The circle, a passive shape. Now, color has very dynamic qualities and can mean a lot of different things. And this was also written about a great deal by Kandinsky. You know, one color might make you feel happy, another sad, and so on. Color is inseparable from painting, and a lot of artists try to organize their color thoughts through using different schemes, and by mixing those three primary colors to create the wide range of color that we know. Now, these different schemes that artists use to organize their thoughts involve the following, or among them are the following. We have monochromatic color schemes where you just use one color. We have a triad, which is three equally spaced colors on the color wheel, the most obvious of which is the primaries, yellow, red, and blue. A tetrad is four colors from the color wheel equally spaced. An analogous color scheme might be used to give you sort of a quiet effect. That's where you use several colors that are located next to one another on the color wheel. And then a complementary color scheme is where you use two colors located across from one another that sort of create a sense of excitement in the work. Value is the artist's term for lights and darks. Chiaroscuro is an Italian term that simply means light dark. You see great use of chiaroscuro in the Caravaggio painting down in the corner here, or the detail from the Caravaggio painting. The light and dark in this painting make for a very dramatic effect. Texture is a significant issue for the realist painter in that you don't want to paint someone's skin and clothing and hair with the same brush strokes if you want to suggest something in a realistic fashion. Light is closely tied to value, and it's maybe even more important to the sculptor in that it reveals texture. In the 20th century, we saw the development of light as an art form in itself. Composition has to do with the organization and placement of forms. I believe that we each possess what I call IDS, or an inherent design sense, where we look at images every day and we kind of come to an understanding of images and how we want to see them presented. And we have a sense of what's good and what's bad, and I think that sense will serve you well in this class. Now, space differs from 2D to 3D art forms in that in the two-dimensional arts it's implied. You might look at a painting and say, wow, there's a lot of space in that landscape, but it's not actual space. In the 3D arts, like sculpture and architecture, the space is actual because you add depth to the height and width that we find in 2D art, like painting. Now, the types of two-dimensional art forms that are studied in the survey classes include painting, drawing, printmaking, graphic arts, and photography. For the most part, in the Survey Art 1 class, you look at painting and drawing. The others come into play in Survey 2. The 3D art forms that we'll look at will include sculpture, architecture, ornamental and practical arts, and ceramics. 3D art forms deal with the issues of mass and volume, in addition to the concerns that we find in the two-dimensional art forms. Now there are a couple of different types of sculpture that you'll need to become familiar with. First off, we have what's called freestanding sculpture, and Michelangelo's David that we see here is a great example of freestanding sculpture. It's also thought of as sculpture in the round. The other type of sculpture is relief, and we have high relief, low relief, and sunken relief. High relief sculpture projects from a background by at least half its depth. Low relief sculpture, on the other hand, just barely emerges from a background. You probably have within reach low relief sculpture. What could that be? The coins that you hopefully have in your pocket. Sunken relief is where the image is sort of incised into the background as opposed to emerging from the background. Now, sculpture can be done in one of two ways. It can be done in an additive sense, like we see here, where you add things together, or it can be done in the subtractive sense. The Michelangelo sculpture of David that we just looked at was subtractive, in that he started with a large block of marble, took a hammer and chisel to it, and knocked away what did not belong. Sounds quite simple, doesn't it? I want to introduce you now to the different types of architectural diagrams that you look at. First off, the 2D schematic drawings that we'll see. A plan is an imaginary slice through a building at approximately waist level, seen from above. Imagine this: you take the roof off the building, you take an aerial photograph. You've got a plan. An elevation shows the exterior sides of a building from a distance, but without any perspective. Everything appears quite flat in an elevation. A section is where you take an imaginary vertical slice from top to bottom through a building, and that reveals elements cut by the slice. It's like a sideways plan. Imagine that instead of taking the roof off, you take the wall off and just look in. Now, cutaway drawings show both the inside and outside elements from an oblique angle, give you a good sense of the whole picture. This pyramid that we see here outside the Louvre in Paris, France, really provides a great bookend to Survey 1, Survey 2, and modern art, in that we almost start with pyramids and end up with pyramids. Now, ephemeral arts are time-oriented artwork. This is largely a modern category, and it includes performance art, earthworks, sculpture that's done literally using a bulldozer, cinema, video, and computer art. And the last three art forms can be replayed, so it's not something that just happens and then is gone forever, as you might find the case to be with performance art, or you might see how earthworks evolve over time and change or disappear entirely. The last concept that I want to introduce before we get started with the class is that of iconography. Iconography can basically be summed up with the one word: symbolism. A great example of iconography can be seen in this painting by Vermeer, Woman Holding a Balance. This painting appears to simply be a woman maybe weighing jewelry or something like that. But here there's a lot more going on than you initially think. The balance is empty. That tells us she's making a decision. She's weighing pros and cons instead of jewels. Painting in the background, if you examine it closely, represents Judgment Day. So what kind of decision is she making? A moral decision. We think she's going to make the right one because she's ignoring what? The jewelry on the table that symbolizes the temptations of the material world. Now, these factors and others all go into creating a very complete story that goes along with this painting that you would not immediately get, at least looking at the painting several hundred years after it was done. So we're going to study what the art looks like, why it was done, and what it means throughout these classes. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to the course, and we'll get on to bigger and better things.